Blog Talk Radio.
Again, we have a very interesting guest. Our guest today is William Wagener. Now, William Wagener, he's got his own television show, which is called On Second Thought, and it's a political show uncovering all kinds of conspiracy and corruption in government.
It's very obvious to me, even sitting in the public section, it was very obvious after the first two witnesses that Michael was obviously the victim here, and it became apparent. But I still thought he might have given them some alcohol. So I paid very close attention when they discussed the jet plane ride and drinking whatever they were drinking out of a Coca-Cola can. I paid very close attention, and day by day I took meticulous notes because we weren't allowed to bring our own cameras. We had a pool camera. Now, as to the Jackson trial, very quickly with the second witness and the next witness, it was obvious that these people were lying for a reason. They saw money at the end of these long lies. The prosecutor would start out, and he would question one of his witnesses, and that would take up usually till the lunch break. Then the defending attorneys would cross-examine them in the afternoon. But the national media processed on the East Coast is 3 hours ahead of us. So they almost never got a report about the defense side. So you just hear day after day of Michael's accused of this, and this guy said this, and this guy said that. And you'd hear, as Tom Mesereau said to me the other day, the most salacious, ridiculous accusations. And then when the defense got up to bat and would prove them to be liars, the evening news was already over with. And so you didn't get to hear any of that. That didn't get on national news. Very rarely did you hear any of it. A couple of things stick in my mind. One was the falsification of the fingerprints evidence. It was carefully contrived by Sneddon. Just like he set Slick Gardner up and it brought all his news media in, they had this thing set up. Well, the boy had testified that Michael got him aroused by giving him this barely legal magazine. Here's the problem with that testimony, and he repeated and was asked at least a half a dozen times by defense after the prosecutor had asked the question. The defense asked him different ways over and over the same thing. What date did he give you this magazine? Where did he give you the magazine? Why didn't your brother notice this? Well, brother had gone off to get a snack at the kitchen or whatever. Well, here's the problem. If Michael gave him this magazine and the boy testified he'd last been at Neverland, the very last time he'd been at Neverland was January, February, or March of 2003. And he'd never returned since. If he got his fingerprints on that barely legal magazine, that would have been miraculous because the magazine hadn't been published till October of 2003. So there is no way a magazine published in October could have been published in January, February, or March, and the boy got his fingerprints on it. So we know the boy was lying. Right there, we know he was lying. And that came out at the end of a long series over several days of questioning. That came out when Tom Mesereau put the cover of that magazine up in front of the whole court. Everybody could see it on a screen that was like 8 feet by 6 feet. Behind the witness, and he asked Gavin Avizo to look at the magazine, and for a third or fourth or fifth or sixth time asked him, is that the magazine Michael gave you? And the boy said yes. And then Tom Mesereau said, with pointing to the date, he said, would you look at the date in the corner of the magazine and read that date to the court? And the boy read the date, and it said October 2003. And then he asked him, now, when did you say you were last at Neverland? And the boy stuck to his story. The boy had been coached not to change his story no matter what. So he stuck to it. And the jury rolled their eyes. And I was sitting there at that point with my media credentials. I got my media credentials by then. I'm sitting in like the seat right behind Catherine, Michael's mother, but across the aisle. And I could see the jury's faces, and they were rolling their eyes like, oh, my God, another horrible lie. So right then the jury, I could see it in their faces. This boy's lying. Gavin Arvizo's lying against Michael Jackson. Now, the prosecutors didn't look at these jury's faces, and most of the media didn't. They were pretty much fixed at the image up on the wall and Gavin on the stand, but I was looking at everybody. And I knew right then and there they couldn't convict him of that one charge. It couldn't. But then there was more evidence, and Tom Mesereau brought up, I don't remember now if it was before or after this. No, it must have been before, because this was the final. Then they moved on to other evidence. Before this, he had brought up the grand jury report from 2004. Because remember, the report on the evidence earlier had been that Michael's print was on one page and Gavin's print was on another page of that barely legal magazine. So, there's a question. How did the boy get his fingerprints on it? Good question. The answer is, at the grand jury in 2004, after they'd made, I think, 80 raids to Neverland, it wasn't just one raid. They went back like 80 times and kept looking and ciphering through things and
this was never told.
I don't think it was ever told on national TV. The local station mentioned that they'd gone back a third or fourth time, but it was much, much more than that. They went back like 80 times. The sheriff's deputies went through that gate. It got to the gate guard, would see him coming and open the gate and just let him roll on through. He didn't stop to ask him. He knew what was going on. I think maybe they'd call in advance and say, we're coming again. We're at your gate right now, and they'd just have the gate open. They'd roll in. And they'd go scrounging for anything because they hadn't found anything in the first 80 raids that they could really nail Michael for. And they drilled open his safe. They went into all the secret passages. They went through his children's drawers. I mean, his children's underwear drawers. They went through everything. They turned things upside down. They just rampaged, and you can understand why Michael felt so violated. I mean, to have the police go through your house once or twice would make you feel violated, but 80 times, maybe 90 times, I forget. Well, the bottom line is that the grand jury in 2004, this experienced, reelected prosecutor, Sneddon, he handed the boy the magazine without putting gloves on the boy. No experienced prosecutor would do that anywhere in the country. You might have a new prosecutor, if he just graduated from law school on Monday and was sworn as a DA on Thursday, he might make a stupid mistake like that, but not somebody of 25 years of being elected and reelected and reelected. No. This had to be premeditated with malice aforethought to tamper with that evidence, to create false evidence, because I can't view it any other way, not from an experienced prosecutor. So Sneddon knew in advance he was going to manufacture this false evidence. He gave the boy the magazine in 2004 at the grand jury, and we know that for a fact because there's a court reporter taking down every single word uttered at that grand jury, which is mandatory under the law. So one of the grand jurors spoke up and said, shouldn't that boy be wearing gloves? Oops. The one grand juror, I don't know what was wrong with the others, but only one spoke up, and it was enough because the court reporter correctly recorded that statement, and when Michael Jackson's defense team poured through the grand jury and they found that, then they got the magazine, they looked at the date, they knew this evidence had been manufactured falsely, with premeditation, with malice aforethought. And those words I use very carefully, but very deliberately, because Michael is dead now. And I hold, it is my view, that the murder of Michael Jackson actually started with the manufacturing of this false evidence in 2004 and carried on right through 2005. Now, that was just one item where they manufactured false evidence. And it's clear, and it's on the court record to this day, and someone should have indicted Tom Sneddon. And why it hasn't happened is because the media has so carefully whitewashed this And then Tom Sneddon quietly retired in his disgrace and took his huge pension. And I think he should be collecting that pension in a and I think he should be collecting that pension in a prison somewhere. And his victims, not just Michael, but the mother. I watched Katherine Jackson's tears roll off her face, or some of these horribly salacious things are being said about her son. And she's right up there in the second row looking at these witnesses telling these horrible lies. And the tears are silently rolling off her face. I could see Tito and Jackie Jackson. You could see the blood throbbing in their necks as they were angry, and they knew these were lies. But they couldn't say anything. They'd just sit there and take this dirt thrown in their face day after day by this slimy family who had been caught stealing from Penny's and then sued Penny's, claiming their security guards, the Gavin Avizio family, Janet Avizio, Janet herself had caught stealing. And when the guards wrestled her to the ground to get the stuff she had stuck under her clothes that she was stealing from JCPenney, she claimed they raped her in a public parking lot. All that came out in the Michael Jackson trial, thanks to Tom Mesereau. And JCPenney, rather than fight it, just said, look, we'll cut you a check for $30,000, go away. So she dropped her lawsuit against JCPenney for rape that never happened, for being fondled and molested that never happened. And they just let her get away with attempted stealing, and they cut her a check. Now, this is what's really cool. Tom Mesereau did some digging. He had his staff do some digging. Found out that she had applied for welfare a day or two after she gets this $30,000 check. And on her welfare form, she claims she's penniless, she has sick children, she has no home, all this crud, so she could get to the top of the welfare list and get emergency housing, emergency food stamps, emergency everything, and she's got $30,000. She committed felony fraud on her welfare. But all the stuff to put her in jail was proved. So you can see the justice system was very lenient towards the liars and the schemers and the deceivers and the extortionists. I mean, she was extorting Michael for money. I mean, that's just to clear what it was. Prosecutors tried to get this cop to lie. He refused. And he said, you've got this chart all wrong. You got these dates connected, the people are calling, you got it all wrong. And then the prosecutor said, well, Your Honor, we'd like to withdraw this from the evidence. And it was the defense attorney, Tom Mesereau, stood up and said, no, Your Honor, the jury has heard this for a half a day. It's been entered in evidence. You can't withdraw it. You've got to leave it for the jury to consider as part of the evidence, good or bad, or words to that effect. And Judge Melville said, well, you're right. It was entered into evidence, and they've heard all this evidence for half a day, so we'll leave it in. But it was already proven. And again, the jury, some of them in the front row were rolling their eyes, thinking, oh, my God. So that's the second manufactured false evidence. I did 12 shows about the Michael Jackson trial during the trial, and the jury could have seen any of those shows, even though they're instructed by Judge Rodney Melville not to look at anything on radio or TV or in the newspaper about the trial. It came out later that some of them had looked at some of the national media things, and some of them have said they were astounded at how the media had twisted the actual substance of what was said by the end of the day, how they'd only report the accusations but not report the witnesses getting caught in the lies. Even Melville I think, got angry with the prosecutor, Sneddon. And there was one point, there was a word, I forget just what the word was now, Tom Mesereau would remember, but they'd agreed out of the jury's ears that that word would not be used. And Prosecutor Sneddon used it once, he used it twice within 30 seconds, and then he went on and looked at the Judge Melville, his longtime buddy and friend, and sort of said something to the effect, well, if you don't mind me saying, and if I can continue, he used the word again, and Melville said, stop. Stop. And for Melville to say anything other than sustained or overturned, and to say to his longtime friend, stop, that was like screaming at a close friend.
The vast majority have no clue. They just think Michael, well, I guess maybe, perhaps he was not guilty, or he maybe was, and he had slick attorneys, and he got away with it. No, no, no. Michael didn't get away with anything. Michael was the victim of 3 felonies, at least 3. And I'm sure a keen legal mind could go through those transcripts and come up with probably 10 or 12 felonies committed against Michael. Every time a witness was coached to lie on the stand, to me, that's felony evidence tampering. But the ones that are provable, I've already mentioned. The conspiracy between the prosecutors to do the fingerprints evidence presentation and the phone conspiracy evidence presentation where their own police witness said, this is wrong, you got this wrong. And he refused to go along and just say, be a yes man. I mean, somebody ought to find out the name of that police officer, and I've forgotten. But someone ought to send that cop a Christmas card and say, thank you for standing up for the truth. The media was in on the lynching and the inquisition of Michael, and one incident stands out in my mind. There's a woman called Diane Diamond, and all these people that were, chiming in to just get their 2 cents worth of fame and say they cover the Michael Jackson trial. They didn't cover the Jackson trial. None of them had a reporter there through the whole trial. Most of the major networks, most of the networks were rotating their staff every 2 weeks. So they could honestly say, well, I didn't hear that evidence that Mr. Wagener heard. I wasn't there that week. And then they may have heard something, but they didn't hear the conclusion of it. 2 weeks later, somebody else did. So they could all duck and say, well, we weren't really conspiring. It's just we were rotating. Diane Diamond and I happened to be standing. It was a very crowded. They had a green tarp around the space so that the fans at the fence couldn't see us when we came out. We're in this pool. And Diane Diamond sticking next to me. And I think it was the day, I'm pretty sure it was the day, that Mesereau just proved that the boy couldn't possibly have had that magazine given to him by Michael, like he testified, because, in fact, the magazine, Barely Legal, October 03, had not yet been published in January, February, or March. So it couldn't have happened that way. So the boy was obviously lying, and it proved that Tom Sneddon had committed felony evidence tampering by giving the boy the magazine at the grand jury with no gloves on. I blurted out. Normally I sat quietly or stood quietly and let the guys from the networks ask all the questions, and I just listened and took notes, and mostly it was bullshit and poppycock to try to ingratiate themselves with their networks and make it look like, yeah, they're on the case and Michael's guilty, and so I just sit and listen to this poppycock. But this one day, I blurted out, shouldn't Tom Sneddon be indicted for his felony of evidence tampering? And Diane Diamond was standing right next to me, and her head spun at me so fast, 90 degrees, that phlegm and spit from her mouth hit me in the face and the neck as she was yelling at me, well, Sneddon's not on trial, Michael's on trial. And she went on and on saying something very angry, and I don't recall everything she said, and I wiped my face off, and after that I made a point not to be standing next to Diane Diamond, and I realized at that point she wasn't just an angry reporter. This woman was mentally off balance. She was delusional. She had a illness, and she then there was a guy named B.J. Hickman who was a 16, 17-year-old fan who had traveled from many states away to be at this trial. But he was a Jackson fan, and he would yell so loud you could hear him inside the hallways of the courthouse. And he had a restraining order put against him by Diane Dimond. And that restraining order was because he would yell, "Michael is innocent, Michael is innocent." And you could hear him above all the other fans. He had quite a set of lungs. And Diane Dimond went to court and said, "I feel threatened by this guy, B.J. Hickman, so I want a restraining order." And the judge gave it to him. So he had to shut his mouth and stay away whenever Diane Dimond was in sight. And at the end, he sued her and a company she worked for violation of his First Amendment rights. It didn't go to trial. They settled out of court, but as a result, whoever it was Diane Dimond was reporting for back east fired her, and she lost her job eventually, shortly after the Jackson trial. And I believe someone's paying her under the table. I'm not sure she's sane or competent. I got all her mental faculties that she could sit down and have a dialogue with me, even if I could get her to that place in my studio to sit down and put the mic on and do a live show with me. I don't think she's mentally competent, just from my observations of her. And she became quite hated among the Jackson fans. But there were other people that were reporting lies, and I would hear them during these breaks, and it just so offended me when someone would get on their private cell phone, a credentialed reporter of many years would get on their private cell phone and talk to their husband or their spouse and say, "You know what, this is all a crap of lies against Michael." And then their business cell phone would ring from New York City or Philadelphia or wherever they were from. And they'd say, "Oh, I got to go. I got to answer the network." And they'd hang up on their spouse, and they'd say, "Oh, yeah, I'm going to give you a report. Say this. Michael was accused today of this, and Michael was accused of that, and it really looks bad for Michael, blah, 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 blah."
The same question. This is a question that many people in general public are going to want to know. Why did Michael Jackson attempt to prosecute Sneddon and Zonin after he was acquitted? Why did he try and press charges then against both the prosecutors and Jan Advisor?
Well, I wondered the exact same thing. The question is, why didn't Michael Jackson go after them for malicious prosecution and for the crimes they committed in the trial? Certainly, I think that the answer is simple. Number one, Michael, I think, was drugged down on the day of the verdict. He was so in shock, so petrified. He'd been waiting for days and over a week for the jury to come back for a verdict. So people were wondering, is he going to be found guilty of something? So he was kind of drugged down. He was in shock. He traveled around the world. But I think there was a deep-rooted religious value given to Michael by Catherine to not sue, they slap you, turn the other cheek. Although Michael did bring some lawsuits against some perjurers and liars that had robbed him of things from Neverland, and they caught these people. Yeah, he did bring some lawsuits, but I think you just about have to twist Michael's arm and bite him and pinch him to make him do that. He didn't want to do it. So I think he had a religious value against it, but also I think he was in shock. And the third reason I think he didn't do it is he knew it would be a very long and expensive, because this county would have spent their last $1 million to defend their own prosecutors. They would have spent everything they didn't even have and taxed the hell out of the people of the county, created new taxes to pay for it. And in fact, they are doing that right now. They're trying to add on a new tax because the county never really recovered from the Michael Jackson cost of that trial. Yes. So I think Michael knew it would be expensive, and Michael was financially weak at that point. And maybe he would have. Had he lived, he might have. But I think he knew he was smart enough. Michael was not a fool. He might have kept a childlike innocence, but I think he was also smart. And he knew he had to have the money to carry out a Michael Jackson trial against the prosecutors. He knew that. And so that's the other reason I think he didn't do it.
And the third question is, you mentioned how in an interview with the professor from Texas, you mentioned that there were 5 anti-Michael Jackson books that went to the shredders as soon as he was acquitted. I was wondering if you can give us any detail or background on those books that were never published.
Yeah, the first and foremost was the eldest female juror. I forget her name, but I have her on video. I can't remember her name. Say it again.
Her name is Eleanor Cook, and she and
yeah, right. That's it. Eleanor Cook. She had a book deal, and she confessed to me when I went to her house to interview her. I don't remember how many months after the trial, but she confessed to me in our discussions that yes, she had made a book deal. She had talked to this guy out of Hollywood, and her name was going to be listed as the author, but they were pretty much going to write the book for her, and she was just going to give them a few little details and stuff that happened in the jury room that no one else would know, and that book was going to come out and find Michael Jackson guilty. And she also told me, which I didn't know until I went to her house, but she had worked for a judge. She's a retired judge's clerk and gets her pension from the county from working from a judge. And she also told me she thought Sneddon and Zonin and Auchincloss did a sloppy, terrible job of prosecuting Michael. She thought it was just one of the sloppiest, lousy jobs she had ever seen. And apparently she had witnessed quite a few trials. So she was angry at Sneddon. And when I got Gary Dunlap to run for district attorney, she actually came out and endorsed Gary Dunlap because she wanted Dunlap to humiliate Sneddon. She was angry with Sneddon for doing such a lousy job. But she also told me that she got on the jury by hiding the fact she didn't like Michael, and she downplayed that part, and she wanted to find Michael guilty because she didn't like some of the stage routines, and she didn't like him grabbing his crotch. She told me this off the record when I went to her house. And so she went in there with a guilty plea in mind, and they're not supposed to do that. When they tell the judge, yeah, I can be unbiased, they're supposed to be sincere, but she basically admitted to me in her own words that she went in to find him guilty. But after seeing the terrible evidence, she was angry, and for a while I was trying to reason with her and saying, well, the evidence was all concocted. It was all fake. It was all phony. How could Sneddon how could he make a silk purse out of a cow's ear? You know, the evidence was no good. But she just, you know, she had this mindset that Michael probably did something to some kid someplace sometime, so we ought to find him guilty this time. And she admitted, you know, in the end, she was forced to just acquit Michael because the evidence was so bad. And to me, that was a tremendous thing to get out of her, to hear that from her own lips. And she didn't want to talk to me about that particularly. And I had to kind of twist it out. And she said, are you taping? Tape part of that conversation, but I've never published it because she promised to come on a live show, which we have never done. She promised to come back